So friends, did you see the new reporting about the text messages between former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and 34 Republican members of Congress on and around January 6th? It's like Meadows was serving as a clearinghouse for treasonous texts. Let's talk about that, because justice matters. Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So did you see the reporting from Talking Points Memo about former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows texting back and forth with 34 Republican members of Congress on and around January 6th in what looks like a concerted effort, some might even say a conspiracy, to deny Joe Biden his rightful election win and keep Donald Trump installed in the presidency unconstitutionally. Here is some of that reporting from Talking Points Memo. Headline: Mark Meadows exchanged texts with 34 members of Congress about plans to overturn the 2020 election. And that article reads in part, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows exchanged text messages with at least 34 Republican members of Congress as they plotted to overturn President Trump's loss in the 2020 election. The texts are part of a trove Meadows turned over to the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th attack that was obtained by TPM. Meadows' exchanges shed new light on the extent of congressional involvement in Trump's efforts to spread baseless conspiracy theories about his defeat and his attempts to reverse it. The messages document the role members played in the campaign to subvert the election as it was conceived, built, and reached its violent climax on January 6, 2021. The texts are rife with links to far-right websites, questionable legal theories, violent rhetoric, and advocacy for authoritarian power grabs. And this next one, friends, really takes the treasonous cake. One message identified as coming from Representative Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina, to Meadows on January 17, 2021, 3 days before Joe Biden was set to take office, is a raw distillation of the various themes in the congressional correspondence. In the text, despite a typo, Norman seemed to be proposing a dramatic last-ditch plan, having Trump impose martial law during his final hours in office. That text reads, Mark, in seeing what's happening so quickly and reading about the Dominion lawsuits attempting to stop any meaningful investigation, we are at a point of no return in saving our republic. Our last hope is invoking martial law. Please urge President to do so. Breathtaking in its lawlessness. And this clown can't even spell Marshall correctly. But that text has got to take the treasonous cake. But it's not only this character, this Ralph Norman, Republican from South Carolina, who was urging in the strongest, most direct, most unconstitutional terms that Trump should just unconstitutionally cling to power, and Mark Meadows needs to help in that effort. It's guys like Mark Green, representative from Tennessee, Greg Murphy, representative from North Carolina. These Republicans were pushing to Mark Meadows these crackpot claims from far right-wing websites, telling Meadows things like, the legislators in Republican-controlled states can just say Trump's the winner, notwithstanding the fact that he lost the popular vote in those states. They can just do it. And then you got guys like Republican Scott Perry, who is telling Mark Meadows that Italian satellites rigged American voting machines. Is it any wonder guys like Scott Perry sought presidential pardons? They sought presidential pardons because they knew they'd committed crimes and they wanted to get away with it. Yeah, well, Scott Perry's not going to get away with it. So friends, this is just a preview of sorts. These text messages that Talking Points Memo recently published, these text messages were just some of the text messages that Mark Meadows gave the January 6th House Select Committee before he stopped cooperating. He didn't fully cooperate. He didn't give over everything. And as damning as these text messages are, can you imagine how bad the text messages must be that Mark Meadows held back from the J6 committee once he stopped cooperating, once he decided he'd rather be held in contempt of Congress and risk prosecution than continuing to cooperate with the January 6th committee? You know, based on what we're seeing in these text messages, it looks like a whole lot of Republican lawmakers were involved in the insurrection. You know, if we look back to the federal statute of insurrection or rebellion, you know, it's not only somebody who incites an insurrection that breaks that federal law, it's not only somebody who engages in an insurrection who commits that federal felony crime, it's also anybody who assists in the insurrection. And boy, it seems like there was a whole lot of assisting going on in some of these text messages from these Republican members of Congress. And let's finish with this, friends. Republican Ralph Norman said to Mark Meadows, "Tell Donald Trump to invoke martial law." You know what that would mean? That would mean the president would basically take the reins of government away from the civilian leadership. He would deploy the military against the American people to deprive the American people of the presidential candidate they voted for in overwhelming numbers. It would mean that Donald Trump would suspend our constitutional rights, and he would basically act as a dictator, installing himself in the office of the presidency for a second term, unlawfully, unconstitutionally. That is what Representative Ralph Norman was urging, was insisting must happen. And that, in my opinion, makes Ralph Norman unworthy of serving in Congress. Why? Because under the 14th Amendment, insurrectionists, after having taken an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States, insurrectionists are disqualified from serving in public office. So all insurrectionists in the halls of Congress need to be disqualified. Because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.